a previous Pope wrote the shroud was, quote, a truly mysterious image which no human artistry was capable of producing.
For centuries, one piece of cloth has captivated, confounded, and provoked humanity. A linen relic, worn and delicate, said to bear the faint imprint of a crucified man's face. Skeptics have dismissed it as myth, a clever forgery, or a superstition, preserved by the faithful. Believers have hailed it as proof, a tangible connection to the divine, a relic of immeasurable significance. Yet as time passes, the Shroud of Turin refuses to yield its secrets. It has endured fire, smoke, centuries of handling, and endless debate, all while remaining unchanged, almost defiant. Now, in the age of artificial intelligence and computational analysis, the conversation has shifted. Machines that read patterns, invisible to the human eye, have begun to study it, not to judge, not to affirm faith, but to uncover what has long eluded human investigation. They find hidden geometry, repeating codes and structures within the fibers that seem impossible to exist in an ancient piece of linen. Was it mere accident, a miraculous phenomenon, or something beyond human comprehension, deliberately woven into the threads? The shroud challenges every expectation, daring us to ask questions we do not yet know how to answer. It is a paradox, a silent artifact that speaks across centuries. Its voice is quiet, nearly imperceptible, yet persistent. The faint image of a man, head to heels, front and back, calls out to those willing to look closely. The wounds, the stains, the delicate lines of a crown of thorns, each suggests a story, a narrative encoded not in words, but in fiber. And for every answer offered, another question emerges. How was it made? Who did it depict? And why does it interact with light, chemistry, and observation in ways that defy explanation? The Shroud of Turin is not merely a relic. It is a challenge, an invitation to probe the boundary between faith and science. Every test, every analysis, every hypothesis has been met with partial success and persistent mystery. Some results validate devotion, others embolden skepticism, yet none provide full certainty. It is a puzzle suspended in time, a riddle encoded in linen, waiting for the right observer, the right tool, or perhaps the right moment in history to reveal a fraction more of its story. As we begin this exploration, we step into centuries of human wonder, into fire-lit chapels, into laboratories filled with microscopes and chemical reagents, into the digital realm where AI listens to the whispers of threads. We enter a story that refuses to end, where the lines between myth and reality blur, and where the answers we seek may be just beyond the reach of perception. The shroud does not yield easily. It does not beg to be understood. It simply exists, an enigmatic witness to time itself, challenging us to see what we have not yet measured and to wonder at the impossible. The Shroud of Turin is not merely a piece of fabric. It is 14 feet of linen, just over 3 feet in width, woven with meticulous precision in a herringbone twill that captures light as though it were water, rippling softly across the surface. To the untrained eye, it is simple, even plain. Yet within those fibers, something extraordinary waits to be seen. The faint image of a man stretches from head to heels, front and back, as if a body once rested upon the cloth and then departed, leaving behind a ghostly impression that defies explanation. The details are subtle, almost imperceptible. The wrist, marks hint at nails driven through skin. A faint blood-like stain at the feet seems to suggest trauma endured. An oval mark on the side implies a spear's thrust. Circles press into the scalp as though a crown of thorns had been delicately lowered and removed, leaving an imprint of suffering. Each mark is a whisper of history, a quiet testament etched in threads, speaking not in words but in patterns, in textures, in absence as much as presence. The face is perhaps the most haunting element. It does not demand attention. It hovers. Eyes closed, a beard parted, hair falling in strands that appear to float above the weave as if suspended in time and space. There is no urgency in the expression, no scream of agony or shout of revelation. Instead, there is a solemnity, a weightless serenity that invites the viewer into a silent dialogue. It is an image that feels alive without movement, tangible without substance. The cloth and the figure seem to acknowledge one another, yet remain distinct, as if an unseen hand had left them in careful equilibrium. The texture of the linen itself is extraordinary. Woven with skill, the herringbone twill creates a subtle play of light and shadow, giving the surface a luminous quality. The I/O threads twist and cross, forming minute peaks and valleys, capturing highlights that shift with the observer's angle. This interplay of light does more than display the image. It enhances it, creating a sense of depth, a suggestion of spatial mapping that has baffled historians, chemists, and physicists alike. Beyond the visual, there is a tactile sense, even if the cloth is rarely touched. One can imagine the weight, the roughness, the resilience of the fibers, each thread a witness to centuries. The stains, though blood-like, sit upon the crowns of fibrils rather than soaking deep within, resisting ordinary explanation. No brushstroke, no pigment layer, no application method known to medieval or modern hands seems capable of producing such an effect. It is a surface phenomenon, delicate yet unmistakably coherent. What fascinates scientists and believers alike is how the image seems to encode spatial information. Depth maps constructed from intensity reveal that areas closer to the presumed body appear darker, while regions farther away remain lighter, a subtle gradient that implies three-dimensional knowledge of form. Attempts to replicate this effect using heat, vapor, or chemicals have produced results approaching the appearance of the image, but never the precision or the subtlety. The shroud remains singular, a record of light and absence, an artifact that resists duplication, that defies easy understanding. Every fiber tells a story. The linen itself hints at origins, with twists and turns consistent with looms of the eastern Mediterranean. Pollen grains trapped within the threads suggest exposure to flora unique to the region, placing the cloth in a broader historical and geographical context. Each detail, when examined closely, becomes part of a larger narrative, a story of craftsmanship, of movement, of human and perhaps even divine interaction. The Shroud of Turin is, in every sense, alive with information. It is not simply an image on cloth. It is a repository of time, a map of light, a record of presence. To gaze upon it is to confront a paradox, a figure that is absent yet present, a story recorded without ink, a miracle of pattern that continues to challenge, captivate, and inspire those who dare to look. The cloth itself seems to whisper, inviting each observer to question, to wonder, and to probe deeper into the mysteries woven within its threads. The story of the Shroud of Turin does not begin with science or skepticism. It begins in human hands, in the quiet devotion of pilgrims, the guarded halls of churches, and the whispered tales of those who encountered it across centuries. The first documented display emerges in 13th century France, in a small town that became a destination for the faithful. People traveled great distances, drawn by the promise of seeing the sacred cloth, to stand in awe of the faint, ghostly image it bore. It was a time when belief and wonder mingled freely, when the line between the miraculous and the mundane remained untested, and the shroud commanded attention, respect, and curiosity in equal measure. Yet, as devotion grew, so did doubt. Skeptics accused priests and church authorities of orchestrating a spectacle, suggesting that the shroud was merely a clever invention designed to inspire faith or to manipulate it. They challenged, questioned, and examined, and through their scrutiny, the cloth gained a dual identity, relic and riddle, sacred object and problem to be solved. This duality has persisted across centuries, shaping the shroud's journey as much as any religious procession or ceremonial display. The shroud moved through countless hands and houses, traveling along the corridors of history until it found a more permanent home with the House of Savoy, who brought it to Turin in 1578. Here, it began a long vigil, punctuated by crises that only heightened its mystique. Fires raged, smoke seeped, and at times it seemed as though centuries of preservation might be undone in an instant. Yet each danger was met with rescue and repair, each threat transforming into another layer of history inscribed upon the threads. Today, it rests in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist, protected by glass and steel, preserved by human care and the slow passage of time. It is shielded not only from the elements, but from certainty, kept at the fragile intersection of faith and investigation. The turning point in the shroud's journey from devotion to scientific intrigue came unexpectedly. In 1898, the Italian lawyer Secondo Pia, intrigued by rumors of a hidden image, set up a makeshift darkroom and photographed the cloth. He expected little more than a muddle of shadows, an indistinct record of an already faint figure. Yet, when he developed the negative, he discovered something astonishing, a face staring back with startling clarity. What appeared faint to the naked eye became vivid in photographic negative. Cheekbones emerged, lips gained definition, hair separated into strands. Hands crossed over the pelvis, acquired form and proportion. The shroud, for the first time, entered the realm of visual proof, but not in the way anyone anticipated. It did not validate faith or disprove doubt. Instead, it introduced a new dimension. The laboratory had joined the chapel, and inquiry now traveled alongside devotion. Over the 20th century, the cloth endured a growing parade of analyses, each layer of investigation uncovering new questions. Chemists examined fibers with reagents, microscopes mapped threads and stains, and forensic examiners noted curious interactions between blood-like marks and the faint image. Textile historians studied weave patterns and compared them to looms known in the Levant. Pollen researchers reported grains consistent with flora from regions far from Turin. Each result bent the debate rather than concluded it, highlighting the cloth's paradoxical nature. It yielded evidence, yet never enough to satisfy certainty, never enough to silence doubt. Through it all, the shroud continued its silent witness, offering just enough information to demand the next experiment, the next investigation. Its image refused to behave like ordinary pigment, lying superficially upon fibrils, resisting replication, challenging every known method of image formation. And as the shroud traveled from chapel to laboratory, through fire and smoke, from France to Turin, it carried with it an aura of endurance, a relic intertwined with history, yet eternally mysterious, a timeless testament to human curiosity, devotion, and the enigmatic interplay of light, time, and matter. The year was 1898, and the Shroud of Turin had long fascinated observers, but it remained a quiet enigma, a relic whose faint image defied easy comprehension. It was in this setting that Secondo Pia, a lawyer by trade but a curious observer by nature, approached the cloth with his camera. He worked in a makeshift darkroom, the heat and flickering lamps creating an atmosphere of anticipation and uncertainty. His goal was modest, to capture a photograph, perhaps record the faint outline visible to the naked eye, perhaps provide a tool for study. What he discovered would transform the shroud from a devotional relic into a scientific conundrum. When Pia developed his plate, expecting only a shadowy, muddled imprint, the image that emerged was startling. The negative of the photograph revealed a face staring back with astonishing clarity. Cheekbones, lips, and hair that had seemed blurred in the dim linen became sharply defined. Hands, crossed over the pelvis, gained shape and proportion. the faint front and back image of the man, once ghost-like and almost invisible, now appeared. As a detailed portrait, luminous and arresting, this revelation changed everything. For centuries, the shroud had been an object of faith and speculation. Now, it was an object of evidence. Yet this evidence did not affirm or deny belief. It simply challenged understanding. Ordinary pigments, applied by brush or stencil, do not produce an image that behaves like a photographic negative. The faint markings on the linen interacted with light in ways that conventional artistry could not explain. The image appeared to exist in 3 dimensions, subtly mapping depth onto a flat surface. Areas closer to the presumed body, such as the nose and forehead, were darker, while regions farther away, like the cheeks, were lighter. The shroud seemed to encode spatial information, a phenomenon that even modern science found difficult to reproduce. The photograph's negative also highlighted the extraordinary subtlety of the image. Hair appeared to float above the weave, strands almost independent of the fabric. The face maintained serenity, eyes closed, mouth relaxed, yet the details spoke volumes about suffering, trauma, and human presence. Every mark, every shadow, every faint line revealed itself with a precision invisible to the eye alone. The shroud, in essence, had become legible in a new language, one written in the interaction of light and fiber rather than in ink or paint. Pia's photograph did more than reveal the image. It expanded the conversation. It invited scientists to consider questions they had not previously imagined. How could an image so faint produce such clarity in negative? How could the faint surface discoloration encode spatial information? How could fibers retain the marks of wounds, of blood, of presence, without traditional pigments or binding agents? It was as if the shroud were not merely displaying an image, but communicating a record, a message encrypted in linen, waiting for the right tools to interpret it. The photography revelation marked the point where devotion and inquiry intersected, irrevocably. Pilgrims could still gaze with reverence, believers could continue their devotion, yet the laboratory had joined the chapel, and science had a seat at the table. From that moment onward, the shroud was no longer just a relic. It was a puzzle, a challenge to understanding, a record that demanded explanation. The negative image, the depth correlation, the subtle yet precise markings, all transformed a centuries-old artifact into a subject of rigorous investigation, bridging the realms of faith, art, and science in a way no one could have anticipated. Once, Secondo Pia's photograph revealed the shroud in a new light. The world of science turned its attention to what had long been a sacred mystery. The Shroud of Turin, with its ghostly image and enigmatic presence, became an object of scrutiny, a subject where devotion met methodology. Laboratories were filled with microscopes, chemical reagents, and the quiet intensity of researchers intent on uncovering the truth. Each experiment promised revelation, yet the cloth maintained its subtle defiance, whispering only partial answers and more questions in return. Chemists examined individual fibers, testing their composition and reactivity. With delicate reagents, they attempted to differentiate the blood-like stains from the faint image itself, seeking to understand whether pigments or dyes had been used. The results confounded expectations. The areas resembling blood had penetrated. The threads in ways distinct from the image, which appeared to lie superficially, coating only the outermost fibrils. No brush strokes were discernible. No binder layer could be detected. The stains and the image seemed to coexist on the cloth, interacting with light and texture in ways that conventional understanding could not explain. Microscopes revealed further mysteries. Each fiber seemed to hold a record of history, tiny ridges and peaks that caught light differently, producing shadows and highlights across the surface. Depth maps constructed from these variations suggested a correlation between image, darkness, and distance from the presumed body. The closer a point on the body, the darker the imprint. This subtle encoding of three-dimensional information defied replication. Attempts to reproduce it using heat, chemicals, or vapors yielded approximations, but never exactness. The shroud remained singular, resistant to duplication, a masterwork of natural or supernatural origin, the process of its creation unknown. Forensic examination added yet another layer. Experts noted the alignment of wounds, wrist marks where nails would have been driven, blood-like stains consistent with trauma, the faint oval on the side resembling a spear wound, and circles on the head suggesting a crown of thorns. The image, however, was more than a series of marks. It conveyed proportionality and form. The hands, the arms, the torso, and the head appeared in proper perspective, with subtle variations in darkness reflecting contours as though the cloth had recorded a living body's presence. Textile historians studied the weave itself. The herringbone twill of the shroud was compared with looms known in the Levant, suggesting an origin consistent with ancient techniques, yet nothing definitively tied the cloth to a specific time or place. Pollen researchers analyzed microscopic grains trapped within the threads, reporting flora consistent with the Eastern Mediterranean. While this evidence did not prove origin, it added another clue to a puzzle, situating the cloth within a possible historical context. Each new test reinforced the paradox. The shroud offered evidence, yet refused certainty. Chemical analysis, microscopy, forensic observation, textile study, and pollen research all produced data that bent the debate but did not end it. No single experiment provided closure. Instead, each raised new questions. How did the image form? Without pigment? How did spatial depth appear encoded in superficial discoloration? How did blood-like stains penetrate differently than the image? Every revelation seemed to expand the mystery, deepening the intrigue rather than resolving it. The shroud's ability to resist replication became a defining characteristic. Countless attempts to reproduce the effects through heat, light exposure, pigments, or chemical treatments came close, yet none captured the precise quality, the subtle depth, and the delicate coherence of the original. The image's superficiality, its interaction with light, and its dimensional qualities remained beyond reach. It was not a failure of science. It was the persistence of an artifact that seemed to exist outside conventional rules. Even within the controlled environment of laboratories, the shroud spoke with ambiguity. Its fibers, twisted and aged, contained centuries of human contact and environmental exposure. Each mark, stain, and pattern bore witness to its journey across time. The image's relationship to the cloth itself, how it lay only on the surface, how darkness correlated to proximity, was measurable, yet inexplicable. Scientists were left with a tantalizing contradiction. The artifact could be described in meticulous detail, yet the process by which it came into being remained hidden. Thus, the Shroud of Turin embodies a dialogue between observation and mystery. It is a relic of devotion, a puzzle for science, and a challenge to perception. It bridges centuries, calling for reverence and rigor in equal measure, demanding that those who approach it acknowledge both what can be measured and what remains unknowable. Every experiment, every analysis, every layer of inquiry brings us closer to understanding, yet always reminds us that the shroud's ultimate secrets may lie beyond conventional comprehension, whispering through threads that have seen the rise and fall of centuries. For centuries, the Shroud of Turin's age remained a matter of speculation. Every thread, every stain, every fiber seemed to resist chronological classification. That changed in 1988, when the promise of scientific precision arrived in the form of radiocarbon dating. 3 laboratories, Oxford in England, Zurich in Switzerland, and Arizona in the United States, received samples from the cloth's lower left corner. The world watched, expecting clarity, resolution, and perhaps an answer that could finally settle centuries of debate. The methodology was exacting. A corner of linen was carefully snipped, divided among the labs, cleaned meticulously to remove contaminants, combusted, and converted to graphite for measurement in particle accelerators. Radiocarbon dating, long trusted to assign ages to organic materials, should provide a window of certainty, and the result, when published, appeared decisive. The shroud was dated between 1260 and 1390 CE, placing it squarely in the medieval period. Newspapers heralded the verdict. Museum voices relaxed. Scholars and the general public alike seemed ready to accept that the mystery had an answer, neatly confined to a single sentence. Yet, as with every layer of shroud investigation, the simplicity of that conclusion concealed complexity. The chosen corner, the lower left near the edge, had been handled repeatedly over centuries. Historical records indicated repairs and possible contamination, particularly after a documented fire in the 16th century. Textile chemist Raymond Rogers studied the fibers in that corner and found anomalies. Cotton interwoven with linen, chemical residues consistent with dye or mending. If the sample included later material, it could easily skew the radiocarbon results, producing a date more modern than the main field of the cloth. Defenders of the 1988 test argued that laboratory cleaning and rigorous protocols accounted for contamination. Yet critics pointed out a fundamental limitation. No cleaning method can completely address heterogeneous repairs. Threads added during medieval restoration could evade cursory inspection while significantly influencing radiocarbon measurements. A small portion of the cloth, they argued, cannot speak definitively for a centuries-old artifact that has endured fire, smoke, pilgrimage, and handling. The verdict, though seemingly clean, left the possibility of error wide open. The dating. Controversy did not exist in isolation. Other scientific methods joined the conversation, not to replace radiocarbon analysis, but to widen the lens. Wide-angle X-ray scattering, for example, examines cellulose order in linen and can suggest age estimates. In some trials, these techniques hinted at dates earlier than the medieval range, though critics warned that humidity, heat, and storage conditions could distort the signal. Error margins remained large, yet convergence across multiple methodologies began to paint a more nuanced picture. Even seemingly unrelated disciplines contributed to the debate. Pollen analysis, though never definitive, revealed grains from species native to the eastern Mediterranean. Textile studies and herb residue examinations suggested exposure consistent with ancient regions. These clues could not prove antiquity, yet they suggested movement, contact, and history beyond the confines of medieval Europe. Each technique added a layer of possibility, broadening the chronological debate and illustrating the shroud's complexity. The heart of the controversy, however, lies in access. The shroud is a relic, a sacred object, not a disposable laboratory sample. Sampling is necessarily limited, constrained by preservation concerns and ecclesiastical stewardship. This scarcity amplifies the effects of small errors. A single thread. The approach is radical because it shifts the focus from what we can date to what we can discern. The negative image, the depth mapping, the superficiality of the discoloration, all these features have been studied for over a century. But AI asks, what have we not measured yet? What structures are present that escape conventional examination? It does not choose a side in the debate. It simply listens, evaluates, and highlights patterns. In a sense, it allows the shroud to speak. In a language tuned to the frequencies of data rather than devotion, AI also bridges disciplines. Where chemistry, radiocarbon dating, and microscopy approached the shroud with isolated methods, computational analysis integrates them, combining data across dimensions to reveal correlations invisible in siloed study. Subtle signals in image, darkness, thread orientation, and fiber reflectivity can be cross-referenced with anatomical expectations and spatial modeling. The result is not a verdict. It is a new lens, one capable of revealing structure, intentionality, or anomalies without harming the artifact or reducing its mystery. In this way, the Shroud of Turin continues to invite inquiry. Even as science measures, photographs, and chemically analyzes, AI explores a frontier where human perception ends. It listens to the whispers of fibers, deciphers patterns, and challenges researchers to see not just what is visible, but what may exist beneath the surface, encoded, encrypted, or perhaps miraculous. The cloth, which has survived centuries of human curiosity, now encounters a tool designed to probe without prejudice. And still, it resists final explanation, maintaining its paradoxical hold on wonder, science, and faith alike.